So yeah, this video kind of done something similar before, although it was, what was it, gothic fairy tale kind of characters, and this time I've widened it a bit. It might be boring to some, but like scenting my favourite books and picking 2 characters from each. We'll keep it to a handful, so it's not a 73-hour video. But yeah, I do like relating characters to fragrances and such, like humanising them. The idea kind of came from watching one of Rose and Jones, Lizzie's old ones. Actually, if I remember, I'll tag that in the bottom. But yeah, I think this is, well, it doesn't matter whether it's interesting. This is what the video is, isn't it? So yeah, we may as well get started. Now, the first book, it was a bit of a toss-up for me between these two, between Alice in Wonderland and the Chronicles of Narnia. I've actually gone for Alice in Wonderland. The Chronicles of Narnia, there's only really Aslan. That's kind of, well, because he's God is the main thing. And I love, oh God, I'm going to confuse the two of these. Lewis Carroll. Yeah, I'm going for Lewis Carroll one because Lewis Carroll was a more fascinating author himself, wasn't he? He was a genius, a mathematician, I believe he was, and someone who his writing style is quite fantastic, isn't it? Very unique, and the guy was a genius, wasn't he? And obviously, this book was obviously kind of a satirical mockery of Queen Victoria, who was a vile, stupid little woman. Not very intelligent and very angry and miserable. The monarchy was not popular back then at all. I did like it is now. So yeah, that's why I've gone for it. And the 2 characters I've gone for, obviously it's going to have to be Alice, because the book is about her, and the Queen of Hearts. Yeah, obviously. So for Alice, what have I scented her with? I have scented Alice with Angel, which might seem a bit weird, but when you think about it, it kind of isn't. It's best not to overthink the background of the book, actually. But obviously it's the Patchouli's the main star of it, and this kind of gourmandy feel, and there's the kind of the sweeter elements in the opening and stuff. But it obviously, the Patchouli's Alice going down and underground, and it's got a little bit of that kind of dark mystery about it. The fruitiness is kind of her. Now, to me, Alice was a kind of, she's very childlike, isn't she? Obviously, because she's a child. So she's just that wonder and that curiosity. Again, let's not get too deep into what a lot of it might represent, because it's a bit ick, isn't it? But yeah, and she's kind of, interesting and unique as a character, I suppose, at the time, kind of written. So I'm not going to go too much into depth, but I think it does suit Alice to a point, perhaps a bit darker than what maybe she was, although again, the background and the kind of going into the meanings, yeah. So anyway, next is obviously the Queen of Hearts. And for that one, this is really easy choice. QH from Redolescent, which is a British indie brand, and this one is kind of this sweet rose and kind of fruitiness. There's bits of woods. I'm actually wearing it today. Oh, it's lovely. It's got kind of boozy rose about it, and it's got this cumin running through it, which gives it this kind of naughty, cheeky kind of dark side of it. Now, obviously, like I say, the Queen of Hearts is quite an angry, controlling, almost psychopathic character in the books, and she's quite obsessive and she's quite brutal and what have you, and selfish, which again kind of leans to the Queen Victoria thing. She was a bit like an overgrown child who always wanted her own way and was very controlling. This again, we're not going to go too deep into it. I'm not going to get into the history of who Queen Victoria was, but she'd had quite an oppressive childhood as well, etc, etc. So, but I think that this fragrance, obviously, because it's meant to represent the Queen of Hearts, but maybe a more contemporary Queen of Hearts than what Lewis Carroll wrote. More of a kind of raunchy, dark character with a bit more joy about her. So yeah, for Alice in Wonderland, was that what the book was called? Was it The Adventures of? For whatever. Next, let's get out one of the most predictable books for me out the way, and that's A Song of Ice and Fire. Again, I'm not going to go too much into detail, otherwise the video will be 40 hours long. And this is the Game of Thrones books. So it's about an entire world going through massive changes. There's magic, there's dragons, there's families usurping the throne, there's battles, there's the people getting more kind of prominent rights and things like that. It's a whole political, magical, fantastic story on so many different levels, and there's so many good characters in this that it was really hard for me to pick. However, first up I've gone for Varys, who's the Master of Whispers or whatever. It's quite tricky because I don't know what happens to Varys in the end unless you go to the TV show. But Varys in the books, he's a very mysterious character. Nobody knows a lot about him. He's kind of a master of disguise. He's very, very manipulative. You could say to a point he's controlled two kings, really. He provides the information that shapes their decisions, and obviously the information he gives them is the information he decides to give them. So that's what's kind of interesting about him. And what I've gone for him is Misia from Chanel. And this is because it's got this, he's actually described in the book as smelling quite powdered and quite flowery in certain settings and that. And flowery and powdery, I mean, is there a better choice than Misia? But it's also got this little touch of leather, like representing the kind of darker undertones of Varys, that he pretty much does whatever is needed to get to where he wants to go. Now, there's nothing particularly malevolent about Varys. Varys represents, he came from nothing and was used as a pawn, etc., and abused and all of that. So what he kind of insinuates is his priority is the realm. It's what's best for the people. It's what will keep everything successful and kinder and easier for the common man. It's not so much bothered about which idiot sits on the throne, as long as they are doing things to help for the good of all, I suppose. And Misia, again, it has that kind of beauty, that kind of relevance to that, doesn't it, really? So yeah, for Varys is Misia. And then there's the other side of that, and that's Cersei Lannister, who again, in a similar kind of way, kind of had her life choices taken away. She didn't marry the guy she wanted to, and was arranged to. She married Robert Baratheon because of the war that happened, and she's someone who has always obviously been oppressed for being a woman, and why should she be? And she's obviously, trying to change that. She believes she can be every bit as successful as any of the stupid men around her, and she kind of, her motivation is, you could say, is power for herself, which I think she wants to do that in a funny kind of way, to prove to her father that she shouldn't have been overlooked, and she's every bit as good as Jaime and Tyrion, etc., and even him. And she's actually probably the most of Tywin's children, she's most like him actually, compared to the other two. And she does some very dark things, but ultimately it's It's for a family, it's to protect her children. Her children mean everything to her. She manipulates and uses Jamie quite a lot, but she does it all to get the power she thinks she deserves, and woe betide anyone who stands in her way. So what fragrance have I gone for Circe? I've gone for Myths Woman from Amouage, and that's because this one it's alright. I don't think it's a listed note, but I get lilies, like dried, decaying, dying lilies. There's tuberose, so it's a very floral fragrance. But that's not just all it is. There's the warm resinousness, the kind of dark warmth in the bottom, and then the rotting flowers is kind of the main part of it, like the stagnant vase water. It's got this real kind of gothic dark beauty about it, obviously because she's a woman and she was kind of forced to live up to this feminine stereotype. You've got the flowers, but the flowers are not just these pretty beautiful flowers. She's so much more than that. There's elements of darkness, death following her around, decay. It's a big opulent fragrance. It will get anyone's attention. It carries a lot of her presence about it, and it just seems to merge with her personality for me kind of perfectly. Now Rose probably would have gone better, but I actually like this because it has that representation of the death and the decay and what have you. So that's Myths Woman from Amouage. Next up we have H.G. Wells's The Time Machine. The book is pretty different to the adaptations of it, let's say. This book is in a sense pretty dark, and it's got a lot of societal kind of things about it. Not all I agree with, obviously. It's ultimately a bit about not being able to change the past, no matter what we do, and that's beyond the reach of man. There's no point us doing things, and what spurs us forward wouldn't spur us forward without the tragedy or whatever of the past that spurs us forward. But ultimately you get to the distant future, when all that exists is the Morlocks and the Eloi, and now these represent ultimately the class system in the UK, if you like. The Eloi are the kind of naive, feckless, stupid, pampered upper classes, and the Morlocks are the industrious, seen as less human. This is what I mean where I don't kind of agree with everything. Industrious, kind of clever ones, and obviously the Morlocks control the Eloi to a point, because although they live underground and they eat them and they're quite malevolent and what have you, they are the ones who are the successful ones. Yes, they've evolved to live underground in the darkness where they would have worked, etc. But the Eloi, who just flounce about, don't really do or create or do anything themselves. The Morlocks do it for them, so they can hunt them and eat them. And that's it's a very apt allegory for even modern times, isn't it, really? The rich without the poor would be able to do nothing, and if it ever came to the day where evolution took us, the working classes would so control the feckless, stupid, pampered nobility and stuff. And that's kind of what it's about. But he makes the Morlocks kind of more evil and single-minded and controlling, and that's kind of where it comes from. It's a clever story. We'll not go too deep into it. Anyway, we're obviously going to send the time traveller and the lass who is called Weena. No wonder I couldn't remember. So yeah, to start off with the time traveller, how would we send him? I'm going to go for Opus III from Amouage. Now this, you know, some people describe it as being quite bookish, a library. He was obviously a clever man. And he was obviously interested in studying and science and history and all sorts of things like that. And to kind of overcome tragedies in his life, otherwise he wouldn't have invented the time machine, would he? But what he sees in the future obviously horrifies him, because I suppose he would have been part of these kind of pampered upper classes, wouldn't he, really? And he goes forward in time and he tries to change things to make it easier for the Eli to be free from the malevolent evil Morlocks. So that kind of bookish, violety iris, a bit of kind of, I think there is mimosa, I always say that, I'm not sure, well, the kind of brightness and the kind of fruity feeling. He's very curious and very interested in the world and wanted to make a difference, and then there's the studious side of him from them, and then that kind of melancholic purple feel, because he's quite a sad character, isn't he, really? But anyway, I'm not going to waffle on, otherwise it'll be 10 hours long. So next is Wiener, and for Wiener I've gone for a Kilian Imperial Tea, which is one I do mention a lot because this is the proper formulation of it. It's this kind of ethereal, peaceful, meditative, spiritual thing. Now, as far as the world that Wiener lives in is very peaceful, it's very beautiful. They just lounge about, doing loungy about stuff, looking pretty and going, oh, and such like. They don't really need to think or do anything. So a fragrance like this is actually very well represented of them, I think. And that kind of pure beauty, the smell of the purity, if you like. I mean, white as in that kind of spiritual meaning of it, nothing else. And it suits her, and all it is like jasmine tea ultimately, with a few little touches of other stuff in there, like musks and things like that, but it's very peaceful and very whatever, and I think it kind of suits her personality and lifestyle, although she is perhaps more, well, made out to be more curious and interested in things than generally the Eloy are. So anyway, yeah, for Wiener is Kilian's Imperial Tea. Next we have just all round one of my favourite books ever. I read properly at university actually and learned to understand it, and that's Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now this is obviously about, well, it's supposed to be a gothic kind of horror story. It's a lot deeper than that. It's not really, you know, jump scare horror of what have you. It's a deep, dark, psychological kind of tale about Victor and his creation, the monster. It's always good to give him a name, isn't it? Let's call him Leonard. Yes, I've been watching a lot of something. I think Lizzie will get that. But we'll call him Leonard. So we'll start off with Victor. Now, Victor is an arrogant man, a selfish man, very self kind of obsessed. His career and his need to be famous and what have you is what ultimately drives him. And he obviously creates the monster. It again, I think it's through tragedy. I think someone dies, don't they, or something. Anyway, he creates this monster from body parts and such like, and it makes him happy for a bit, maybe, I suppose. But immediately, kind of, he rejects his creation and regrets it, because the monster's obviously it's alive, but it doesn't have the same whatever it was he was trying to put in there, humanity, if you like. So he rejects it. Now, personally, I overthink this book. I think Victor could represent, I don't know actually anything about Mary Shelley's relationship with her father. But I suspect it could be like that she was rejected. Obviously we all know a lot about her mother, but not her father. She had quite a tragic life and that, which we'll get into. But yeah, so Victor's an arrogant, selfish person. He does befall a lot of tragedy in the book, but it's kind of all his own fault. It really is his own fault. He tries to just reject the mess he's made and move on and run away and live his own life. And when he comes to him for help, the monster, he rejects him. He makes a simple want and he rejects him because he's scared of the outcome of it, because he thinks he's turned into some murderer and stuff. We'll come into more of that with the monster. So what fragrance have I picked for such an arrogant, selfish man? Why, Creed's Aventus, of course. We all know that one. Birch, pineapple, bergamot, patchouli, nowadays ambroxan. There's loads of batch differences and people get aroused over talking about them. I'm not that. We're just talking about the basic. We know what the DNA is. But it's called the king, and people who wear it think they're kings. So I think it kind of matches that kind of arrogance of the character. And that's it for Victor. Now for the monster. The monster in many ways I think represents the author Mary Shelley herself. That grouse. And because in her life everything she touched died, and this is the thing with the monster, he has no understanding. Ultimately he's a child and he can't understand why everyone kind of judges him basically by the way he looks, and he accidentally kills people until he gets sad about being alone and miserable, so he acts out and he does some quite wicked things to get at Victor. So there's a real sad darkness about the character. The monster is not bad. The monster is maybe reacting in any way someone abused will be. I'm not like, you don't go murdering people and what have you, but he hasn't been brought up, he hasn't been given what life is or the rules of life and things like that. And by the way, he's only reciprocating the way he's treated, with malice and disgust and horror. And obviously again, I think, I'm not going to get into it otherwise it'd be too long, but Mary Shelley had her own kind of mental issues and things, which is quite sad from her sad life. So I think they fit, and what I've picked for that is Persephone's patchouli. Now the name alone, what it represents, should kind of give it. She's the queen of hell. Supposedly like a sad story, but it's not really. We're not going to get into that. But this kind of representation of death. But she's also the spring goddess, isn't she? You know, life. So there's the pomegranate, which is obviously representative of something else as well. But the sweetness of that with the plum, and then it's kind of lovely patchouli and these green notes, and it kind of fizzes and it's alive, but with a darkness. And I think that kind of represents where the monster is himself. He's got so much to give, so much love, so much warmth, so much of his good side, but he's never given that chance because people fear him or whatever. Like people fear death, would have probably feared Persephone, the queen of the underworld, and that. So I think that the two fragrances, the fragrance and him go together really well. So for the monster from Frankenstein is Persephone's patchouli from Electimuss. And a predictable book for me. I am saving my favourite till last, but a predictable book is obviously Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is not really like the films or the modern adaptations and stuff. It's an unusual book to read because it's basically people's diary entries and things like that you're reading. But we'll pick the two characters from it as Dracula himself, who isn't actually that much of an existence, a character in the book. It's all from other people's perspectives, and of course Jonathan Harkness, who is not what's his face for it's a really terrible actor. He's not him. Oh, why is my name all... My head's blank doing this. It's an awful day. Well, yeah, we'll start with Jonathan. So, yes, Jonathan. He goes to visit Dracula, who he realises isn't a sort of top bloke, and ultimately Dracula leaves him locked in the castle. We'll keep it as brief as that, but he manages to escape and come back to England because he knows what he's up to. He knows what Dracula's plans are, that he's gonna, you know, do naughty things in England, and he just so happens to do things to Jonathan's friends and his partner, which I think are coincidence, pretty much, because they first occur in Whitby, and obviously they're from London. But whatever, that's kind of it. Now Jonathan himself he's a very intelligent man, he's a very brave man. He's not the person who kills Dracula. In the end it's his friend, who I can't remember the name of, who ends up killing Dracula. But he's a hero. He's not this vacuous nobody like he is in the films. Keanu Reeves, that's it. Oh yeah, Jonathan. He's not like that. He is smart and he's quick-witted and protective. So what fragrance would really suit Jonathan? Because he's a lawyer, and he's you know, he's very well-to-do and stuff, I'm going to pick my only Roja fragrance, and that's Roja 51. And that's because this one is quite floral, it's quite powdery, it's quite vintage. It's something that a bloke of his time would have wore, like beautiful soft flowery petals, and I think there might be a tiny touch of aldehyde. It's got this kind of classic elegance about it. It's not particularly exciting or interesting, it's just beautiful and unnecessarily opulent. Something a kind of lawyer would wear, not thinking too much about it. I just think it suits him and his personality. He's quite soft-natured as well, and empathetic and deeply emotionally intelligent. So yeah, for Jonathan is Roja's 51. So for Dracula I'm going to go for Parfums de Marly's Delina. Now this is because the character in the book is not Gary Oldman. The character in the book is kind of based on that Byron-esque, charming, kind of noble man who's very dangerous and whatever. But there's like I say, there's not a right lot about Dracula as a person. It's more the things he gets up to. But he does have these powers to turn into different things, to seduce and control people, to control their minds and see through their minds and everything like that. I suppose there's a certain amount of charm because obviously he's aristocracy and things like that about him. And he's a bright man, and he's studied the dark ways and all of that. And the reason this relates to Delina, which is rhubarb, sharp rose, loads of kind of goopy, weird notes and things that don't really smell like nature, and that's got a lot to do with Dracula as well. But this fragrance in particular has a hold over people. Nobody can explain what it is about Delina other than it's been very hyped. Again, people in real life never heard of this and don't wear it. So what is it about this fragrance? It's like it's bewitched you. It's got into your mind and told you that it's good, and tells you that you love it because everybody else does, or something like that. And I think that's that kind of control and manipulation that Dracula himself has. I was going to go for, you know, there's the obvious one, but I think Dracula in this book is a lot more complicated and less human, and more kind of a feeling and a spirit and a kind of an embodiment of evil, I suppose. So yeah, for Dracula is Delina from Parfums de Marly. So finally, as we're all wondering when this was coming, is my favourite book is George Orwell's 1984. And the two main characters in it, obviously Winston and Julia. Now it's a dystopian book that ultimately is exactly how society has worked out, controlled and monitored by the governments and big business. I mean, the governments ultimately do it on the behalf of big business, don't they, and that. There's the proles, the people at the bottom, your reform voters who just want an easy life, just want to get on with it. And then there's the party members, could be Tories or Labour, you know, authoritarian, controlling the information, controlling everything, and also kind of brainwashing and controlling their own people to do what they want. It is ultimately modern society, isn't it? Your mind is not your own. And Winston, he's the main character, he sees this. He sees the world for it as it is. Big brother Nigel Farage is not all he seems to be, may not even exist. He's just a figurehead to get the people to think he's benevolent. And this has happened after maybe there was an original war, and these people take more and more powers to control. They want the power, everything for themselves. They are the ones in control, and ultimately they want to get to the stage where they can control what you think and what you see, and so that what they always tell you is right. So much like our modern day democracy governments now. That's what they want to do. They want to control the narrative. They want to tell us the history their way. They want to rewrite it, and etc. Anyway, Winston sees through all this. I relate to Winston a lot, but he can't say anything because, you know, then the thought police will come and he'll be taken away, ultimately. And in the end, they give him kind of the ultimate punishment. They more or less confirm everything is nonsense and what he thinks is true. But then they break him so that he just accepts it. He just willingly goes along like a drone and accepts everything that's real. And for me, that's one of my biggest fears. But Winston is also a kind of, he starts off as quite cold and hates everyone and hates everything. He kind of, when he meets Julia, he hates her. He wants to kill her, in fact. But that's because she has some sort of, there's something about her he really likes, and that's dangerous. You're not supposed to feel, you're not supposed to be attracted, and what have you. So that's a big theme through it. Julia's kind of his loss of control, the thing he doesn't really understand, his fears, he gives himself to her, which is something he's never done and shouldn't do. Love is not a thing in this society. So what fragrance have I picked for him? Come on, you knew the fragrance was going to be in here. Noir de Noir, from Tom Ford. Now this one, it could be a fragrance of revolution. It's red. It's also kind of mysterious. There's a lot of darkness in there. And obviously because I relate to him so much, I wanted something that relates to me as well. Has a certain charm, and on the outside seems very pleasant and approachable. But there is that darkness and that richness and that complexity going through the fragrance. A lot like Winston himself, he's constantly having to be the sweet rose. You know, not thinking, simple, basic, but behind that sweet rose is all that complexity and darkness and thought and deepness and levels and ways of seeing things. So I think Noir de Noir is great. Very brief, but yeah, Noir de Noir from Tom Ford to Winston. Now Julia. Julia is the thing that ultimately ends Winston. She kind of doesn't care, she doesn't overthink. She's faced the inevitable that they're all going to get caught and they're all going to die one day. And she's cool with that, and she's going to make the most of everything she can. She's very charming. She loves Winston. She breaks them barriers down. Their love becomes too strong. It becomes, they start looking out for each other and things like that, which is dangerous. Because again, their love for each other is stronger than their love for the party, and therefore the party doesn't have control over them. But Julia, she's quite cheeky, she's very deeply intelligent, she's also a bit daft and a bit flippant. Like I say, she just doesn't really care. And what the fragrance I've gone for her is Black Opium from Yves Saint Laurent. And this is because it's something I could just imagine her wearing. You know, just one of them kind of not particularly flash fragrances, kind of mixes in with everyone. It doesn't really stand out anymore, but it's got this kind of unbelievably alluring, intoxicating feel about it. I don't know, this is not scientific, but I think a lot of men love the smell of that. They'd love it on themselves, but I suppose, you know, modern society and all that, they kind of would love it smelling it on someone. It is kind of seductive and dark, but easy going. You know, it's quite, I suppose we think of it now as even quite youthful. In our day we'd think of it as a kind of older person thing, but not really. It's fun and it's enjoyable and it's loved by all, and that's kind of a bit of what Julia will be. So yeah, the last one in the video is Julia and Yves Saint Laurent Black Oak. So we are now done. We are finished. I can stop walking around these woods in a circle. I don't know, I might refilm this. If I've refilmed this, you won't know I said this, but obviously it was a bit loose all over because I didn't bring my notes, and the thing I struggled to remember the most was the fragrances I'd matched them with. Yeah. So yeah, that's why it's a bit kind of loose. Plus this walk is exhausting. It's very cold, which you can't tell, but I'm sweating, and it's windy. Again, no one needs to know this. Anyway, let's stop the waffle. What's your favourite books? Who are your favourite characters from them books? How would you scent them? Would you scent any of these characters any differently? Are you a fan of these books as well, or were they a surprise to you that I picked a lot of these? I don't think they're kind of hidden books, obviously very popular books. You know, I'm not into reading indie stuff and stuff, things like that. I could have put some Byron in here, I could have put loads of other books, but these were the ones I found I knew the best. Anyway, that's it. No more waffle needed. Bye.